Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mind Takeaway episode.
Hello, welcome.
This is the second part of an episode we recorded in Belgrade. I don't know if you remember, but this was around 5 years of us celebrating the podcast. And we wanted to share some of the insights, the learning, and the takeaways from not only recording the 5 years of the Mind Takeaway podcast, but also over the last 5 years for the Mind Takeaway as us as coaches, mentors, trainers, facilitators, for leaders, teams, and executives. We just wanted to share some of the things that have had real impact. They affect results and have made all the difference for individuals as well. So the first 6 that we shared, I will put the link in the show notes as usual, so you can have a listen to that previous episode. But let's go straight into number 7, the 7th takeaway, which is around feedback. Our take on it is that it's part cultural fit, part your intention, your intentionality. Do you want the person to grow and learn from the feedback? Or is it more of a F you, you're rubbish at your job and I want you to know that you're not great? Because I'm guessing that kind of feedback won't be well received. The last bit of feedback as well is focusing on the actual behavior to make it less personal, because if it feels like a personal attack, the person's less likely to accept or listen to it.
So what we've noticed when it comes to feedback and why most people struggle with feedback is because it's personal and, it's kind of attached to how we are comfortable with feedback, receiving it as well, and our experience of feedback when we were kids. But also there is this misalignment with lots of models, feedback models, that they're all nice, but why don't they work? Because these things are not in place.
Yeah, I would agree that all of these models are actually not a bad thing. They can be useful, but if you don't have an awareness around your intentionality and the other things that we mentioned, it's more likely, regardless of if you have eloquent, perfect delivery in the language, it still won't be well received and listened to or acted on, if that makes sense. I just want to circle back to the cultural fit part of leadership as well. What we mean by that is that although we're a very international world nowadays, we're multicultural, and I'd hazard a guess that most people, if you're in a team or you work for a company, you're probably working with people from different experiences, different backgrounds, different countries. It's kind of a given. It's kind of normal, right? So what we mean by that cultural fit is just to be aware of when you get to know someone really well at a more of a granular level, that they have grew up with a different experience than you. And it's not a bad thing. It's just to be aware that some people like explicit feedback. And what I mean by that is very detailed, prescriptive. You did this, and I'm very clear on what I'm going to tell you, and you need to do this, this, and this to improve. And some people have grown up. I'll give an example of Asia, for example. If you grew up in Japan, the feedback might be delivered in such a way that you normally would fill in the gaps. But that is a cultural shift. That's the cultural part. And it's not as strong as some of the books or the academics might make out, but it's just to be aware of that. That if you've grew up with a certain experience about how someone has told you what you can improve on, how can you learn from your experience, it's very difficult from, for example, when I grew up in Britain, and that mirrors America as well, where we're at the extreme end of we're going to explain the shit out of it. We're going to tell you exactly what you didn't do and how you behaved and what the gaps are, and we're going to support you and coach you to get back. If you don't have enough trust and respect with that individual and they've grown up on the other side of that sliding scale, that might get in the way. So that's all we're saying, really. So the next one, Mira.
Yeah, the delegation. And in order to delegate, you need to know your team well, let go of control, and allow people to learn by doing things their way. Now, that doesn't mean give them the stuff and forget about them. It means that they need to have right level of support to get the job done. And right level of support, it depends on where they're at, what they can do, what they've done in the past, and where they need to get, what is the goal of a project, for example, or the task you're giving them. And so to some people, again, what Peter just mentioned, depend on the culture, their previous experience. To some people, you need to be really explicit on the beginning and explain what they need to do and put steps, maybe even create some guidelines. And to other people, you give them a free rein and they get really creative and they have good network and they can get stuff done in their own way. And make sure that you support them through the process. What happens in delegation is that often managers, leaders, they prefer to do things themselves because it's faster. They they don't want more work because if somebody messes up, then they will have to fix it. They are scared of mistakes. By delegating to other people, we actually learn lots of things about ourselves and are transforming ourselves as leaders.
And the only other bit to mention around delegation is that quite often, if we're uncomfortable about the way that someone uniquely gets the same results as you, but you're uncomfortable about the way that they went about it, that's, like or not, micromanagement. So you've got to get comfortable trusting people. And as Mira said, that yes, initially, if you're giving someone an opportunity for growth, they may not get it right the first time, but that's having the patience and the courage to take a step back and allow them the ability to learn from their experience. And that's how we all learn. We forget as seasoned, experienced leaders sometimes that we too were in that period where, we didn't know everything and we also needed that support and patience from someone else. Number 9 is the importance of reflection and leaving yourself enough room for creativity and processing information. Because as we've said in many episodes, we live in a fast-paced technological world, which is pretty fascinating. It's amazing. We too love technology, but quite often, without the human aspect being looked at, giving yourself enough room to process said information, you end up just being busy and burning yourself out. And this reflection time might look like a waste of time. It might look like it's unproductive time, but we see it as completely different. It's the most useful thing you can invest in during your working week to fill, to leave some gaps for processing, the information you've just been given in a meeting. You might have to learn something new, technical. You might have changed the processes in your business. You might be looking at a really complex problem or an opportunity that you want to resolve as a business, as a team. You have to leave downtime to reflect on what could we do.
And also sometimes that downtime is doing nothing. How many times did you think about something a lot and couldn't find the answer? And then, you went for a walk and you got the answer. You did something else and the answer showed up. You played with Lego and the answer showed up. You went, had a shower. How many good ideas happen when people are actually unable to do anything else, when they just need to do nothing. And so, that may look like unproductive time, but actually, we need to see how, what kind of productivity comes from those spaces.
And it's really difficult for leaders in general to have the courage and to trust their people to do nothing during the working week. But it's not, we're saying do nothing. It looks like it's nothing, but processing and allowing your team, for example, you might be lucky enough to be next to a woods or a forest or a local park. Allow your team the room to be able to go for a walk if they're not able to come up with a novel or innovative solution. And maybe it's time to leave the office. Quite often we've said in a previous episode that if you want to do business, strategy or work out creatively or collaborate, sometimes it's switching it up and doing something that's absolutely not related to work. It could just be a team building activity where you end up doing something that you might think is, unprofessional or just a waste of time. But that actual investment in that teamwork allows someone or all of you to suddenly go, oh, you have that eureka moment. And annoyingly, but just the way it is, that quite often our creative spark comes from, as Mira said, it could be being in the shower. It could be running down the road because you're into, going on a run before you start your shift in work. It could be anything. But the problem with that is trying to micromanage or corral that solution. That's where we see leaders getting really stuck.
This reminds me of something that I've read in a book by Leonard Mlodinov. He's a scientist, and he wrote quite a few interesting books. One of them is Elastic. I think that's the book I've read it in. And the other one is Emotional. And he used to work with Stephen Hawking. And when he was talking about how mind works and, the processing time, he said when he used to work with Stephen Hawking, he would think about, there was a problem, there was a challenge, there was something scientific he was working on, and he would come to Stephen when he got stuck and did no answer, when everything else they've tried and there was no solution or the idea. And he said, I'll ask him a question. And he said, unlike when you saw him having an interview, he gets questions well in advance, and it takes him hours to come up with the answer, to type the answer. And so he said, when I would ask him a question, sometimes I would have to sit there for a couple of hours waiting for him to give me few sentences. And he said, most of the answers I would actually get myself at the time when I was doing nothing but sitting them waiting for him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But it's not easy for a lot of people, and me included. Back in the day, it would be really uncomfortable just to sit there doing nothing, because I would get itchy feet. I'd want to do something, or I'd feel guilty because I feel like it's an unproductive time. So the next one is number 10, which is loudness and being action orientated might not always be a good fit as a leader. So sometimes, often, more listening, more reflecting, as we talked about, and including people is a more powerful and impactful way to lead. So we see leadership as really a service role. We see people talking about servant leadership and all of that, but it just simply means that, leaders, it's not a singular approach. Leadership isn't a singular thing, even though it looks that way. Yes, you're getting paid the big bucks if you're the CEO, and sometimes can feel, isolating and a pressured role. But all of the best CEOs in the world that we've interviewed or we resonate with always tell us that, they might make some big decisions in isolation because they're getting paid to deal with that pressure. But 99% of things are collaboration. It's trusting a team to do the best work. It's working out what would be the right thing to do. It's not dog eat dog, where we see leaders being really loud and they think that it's shouting the loudest and, grooming their own ego is a great example of leadership, because again, you are being looked at by everyone else. Your team is relying on you to be a good example. What's the right behavior? What constitutes good leadership? And what we see is that quite often the people that are more rounded in their approach, they take a step back and they think about stuff, and they really take time out to listen and understand people in the team and the people around them. They're usually the most impactful leaders. And that's having the right approach. Now, it doesn't mean that you still don't have to self-promote sometimes, because that's, like it or not, it's part and parcel of being a leader. And that doesn't mean that you can't hold your own in meetings, but it's not about shouting. It's not about taking all the oxygen in the room so no one else can have their say, or getting into debates and being the strong, always winning. It's literally about how can I don't know, yeah, how can I have impact by taking others forward with me? What can I do to make this, situation better? How can we improve our products? How can this company get better by us going forward together? it's a teamwork thing.
Yeah. So what we said on a very beginning when I think it was the first point in the previous episode, is leadership isn't about you. It's not an ego thing,
Yeah.
although it often looks like it, because people get exposure, people are visible, people are making decisions, but ultimately it isn't. It isn't about you.
So the next one, number 11, is around decision making. So often leaders get into the trap of having to be right, and that comes with all that pressure. If I make the wrong decision now, what would that look like? There's a lot of shame around it and guilt. What will people think of me? If I make a decision, I could lose my job. It can definitely have a detrimental impact on the company. A decision. I don't want to say right or wrong because that seems so black and white, but you could make a decision where there's a massive amount of learning, but there could be a financial implication. It could be the wrong product. You could be ahead of the curve and your product is just too futuristic where people just don't get it and it falls flat on its face. But what if we were to tell you that in terms of decision making, when you really become a good leader, you realize that you're only as good as the data that you have, your level of awareness at the time. And even though it looks like you need more information, you need to ask more people, and you sit on your hands, you just have to just go with what you know. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be checking in with people, far from it. So, you should rely on your team. You can, if it's something you can involve them in, we've heard CEOs say this all the time, that they're going to make a decision. It's my decision. So I am entrusted and paid to do that and take that pressure from you. But I'm really curious to know, what do you think? Because I want to take in your considerations and your experience and, your thoughts around this, because quite often a collaborative approach is, especially when we're talking about the complexity that we're all battling with, the way that the world is so uncertain. And even with all the data in the world and having the great technology around you, it still doesn't help you really map out the future. It's always a best guess, finger in the air. But at least if you've covered all of your bases, that should give you enough level of confidence to say, okay, I'm good to go. Let's just roll with it. And it's really been open to the fact that, whatever decision, whatever the outcome from said decision, you can always be open to learn. And actually, some of the times when I know for me, for example, some of what I thought in the past was monumental failures, my career was over, stuff like this, it ended up being one door opened when one shut in my face and the door slammed and knocked me on my arse. But actually, wow, the learning, once I got over myself and I had a bit of a I grieved around what I lost. As soon as I could brush myself off and look at the learning, and I was willing to do that, the opportunities were massive.
Yeah, and it's also interesting what happens with our brain, and how much we are open to different possibilities, seeing different options, and making better decisions when we are not focused on doing it right. So doing it right comes with lots of pressure and stress, and we know that pressure and stress are, they're very good in taking you out of the situation when you have a tiger about to attack you. It's single focus, it's all energy in one basket, and run or do something else or fight it. But what happens when we are making decisions and we are under lots of pressure and stress is that narrow focus is deleting everything else that may be important. So your focus isn't on doing what's best, but it's actually being right. And so once you let go of being right, you're then able to hear what other people are saying. You're able to maybe spot better decisions. And, you might decide I'm going with that and then say no at the last moment because you're not scared. You're more connected with the direction you're going as a company, as a CEO, as a leader of a team, than to your own, again, fear comes from ego, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So the last one, number 12, this is an interesting one because we hear a lot of mention, people are always talking about vulnerability, the wonderful Brené Brown, that's her kind of wheelhouse. And we really resonate with that. But also we see that, you have to be brave. It's easy to say, hey, be vulnerable and expose yourself as a leader. But then people don't explain that kind of incrementally you need to build up to being brave, so it's around taking responsibility. So we see bravery and vulnerability having to go hand in hand. Leaders that are not scared of going into the unknown and standing up for what they believe is right. And that's in order to do, okay, beep, start again, yeah? So number 12, it's about bravery and vulnerability going hand in hand. And there's a lot of talk about vulnerability, the wonderful Brené Brown, her book on how to dare to lead, is it, Mira? It's great. We resonate with that. But what we've noticed is we need to unpack for many leaders that how do you even get to the point of vulnerability? So bravery needs to be looked at as well. And really what we mean by being brave is taking responsibility for your action. So if you say you're going to do something, but then you're misaligned and you don't do it, it causes a rift with your team. People then mistrust you. And it could be that you're not being insidious. It's just that you innocently might have missed something. You've had a challenging week. But what I would do, and this is where the bravery comes in, is say, hey, team, yeah, last week was a nightmare. If I'm honest, I made a mistake. My bad. I said I was going to do this and I didn't. So now I'm going to circle back to you and apologize first, but also more importantly, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And then shut up and listen to their response and get feedback where it is being vulnerable, because you will feel exposed. You might even feel a bit silly, stupid, whatever your go-to things that you tell yourself in a negative feedback, negative self-talk. But it's really just being aligned with your actions. That's what we're talking about. And vulnerability isn't such a negative thing. It just means that you're showing your team that you're human, you're not infallible, you're not an oracle, and you too are willing to learn from your mistakes. And I guarantee if you do that authentically, if you do that with authenticity, you're not doing that as a strategy, you're not sharing a mistake to try and get leverage over your team, because that will absolutely not give you any impact. It'll probably cause your team to push back and say, that's a bit insidious. So we're talking about when there's genuinely something where you made a mistake, it's not the end of the world, and then you have the courage and bravery just to share that, you're willing to learn from it. Because if you give your team feedback around the things that they're maybe amiss and they've got gaps in their skills, but you're not role-playing that positive behavior for you yourself as a leader, then it's going to be much harder for your team to learn and grow and for you to coach and mentor them on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the other part of vulnerability is being honest with how we feel and what is going on, and it's being brave to say, I'm frustrated with this, or I don't understand this either, or I don't know what to do. And so vulnerability is, because when I say these things, it sounds, what's a big deal about that? But often people attach feelings with not knowing, feelings with what it means to be a leader, certain feelings that it feels like if I'm exposing that, I'm vulnerable and I'm open to being hurt in some way. If I'm honest with this team member and I say, this is frustrating and I feel frustrated, how will that person perceive it? Will they think I'm a bad person? Will they think that I'm weak? Will they think that I'm no good enough? And so vulnerability doesn't come from just saying it, but implications, the fear of implications of what that may mean for me. And so, you see how it actually can be challenging to do that, and why we need to be brave to actually be vulnerable.
And before we finish, I just want to add to that what helped me, and I know Mira and I have talked about this, and we instill this into our clients, is that when we mention bravery and vulnerability, these labels come with a lot of scary emotions and fear, which is completely natural. I get that, because there's that exposure. Oh my God, I can't look stupid in front of my team and all of that. But it's really more about vulnerability and bravery is your own emotional regulation. So it's being able to regulate your own emotions and be aware of your emotions. So if you're having a challenging day and you think it'll be useful to say, me too, to the team. Yeah, this has been crazy this week, what's going on? And you're just reflecting on your own emotions, but then sharing them, that's an emotional regulation. That's being human, because we're all affected by our emotions, both in a positive and negative way. And where we emotionally regulate ourselves, that's when it's really positive. That's when you have more impact, because you're aware that you're fearful or you're having a real challenge, but you're not doing something negative or taking action that's going to impact the team in a negative way, because you're just sharing that you're a human being. And that's it. That really is it. I know it sounds so simple, but it's just being aware of when your emotions get in the way. Because when fear and shame and guilt kicks in, when it will, because there's a guarantee it will do, they are very strong drivers of a human emotion, right? Maybe you can
Yeah,
talk a
they're very strong drivers of human behavior. And so it's interesting how we naturally regulate ourselves by trying to fix the emotion, which is not a very good way often. And so our behavior comes from the emotion. We don't stop and think and accept the emotion. So what Peter is saying here is that when you share, when you acknowledge your emotion to yourself, and if it makes sense to share it with somebody else who is around you, who is also impacted by the same thing, that is the emotional regulation. And then making a decision or making the next action or behavior that comes from that regulated emotional space, very different than the behavior or decision that comes from heightened strong emotional state. And it can be guilt, shame, fear, but it also can be very, very exciting emotion, very positive emotion that can also lead to consequences, because again, it doesn't come from regulated space. It comes from something that we just got excited and run with and didn't make any sense at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's fine. So I hope this has been useful. So that was the other six. The first six, like I say, we'll share the link for that. And like always, let us know what you think about this. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.